In the last few years, the world has experienced high inflation. Around 8 to 10% inflation rate across the globe is what we've seen. Every one of you watching this video has experienced the pinch of this increasing inflation, which may have come in the form of food costs or travel costs or just shelter alone. But what would our lives look like if the inflation rates hadn't stopped at 8 to 10%, but instead they had gone all the way to 52,000%? That is exactly what happened in the case of Venezuela, a country that was at one point the fourth richest country in terms of GDP per capita, 12 times richer than China. So in this video, we try and understand what economic crisis is Venezuela going through, why it's been ongoing for almost a decade, who are the people responsible for the Venezuelan economic crisis, and if there's any hope down the end of this tunnel. So let's get started.
The demonstrators arrived in their thousands for what they called the mother of all protests.
Maduro will only tighten his authoritarian grip. What seems less likely than ever is a peaceful transition.
Venezuela is a small South American country with the highest proven oil reserves in the world. The oil was discovered in 1914, and by 1950, Venezuela was already the fourth richest country in terms of GDP per capita. In the year 1950, the difference between the American GDP per capita and Venezuela was close to $2,000. Fast forward to today, it's close to $50,000 per capita. How did things get so bad? In order to understand that, we have to look at the economic history of Venezuela, at least from the 1950s onward. You see, after the World War II, Venezuela came out mostly unharmed. By selling a lot of oil to the Allies, it had made a good chunk of money as well. Through the 1950s to 1980s, Venezuela saw a lot of economic growth because the oil prices were going up. They used this oil money to improve the living standards in the country by building new infrastructure, improving health, transportation, everything was improving within the country. However, the country also had a big issue with corruption. A lot of the money being generated was just being pocketed by a lot of the politicians. By 1982, Venezuela was the richest country in Latin America and was also seen as an example for what other Latin American countries should be doing in terms of democracy and wealth. All of this oil money is great, but the country did very little in order to diversify its economy. If anything, it just kept becoming more and more dependent on this one resource, that is oil. The politicians were not just corrupt, they were also using this money in order to prop up certain social welfare programs just to stay popular and get re-elected. You see, when the oil took a dip in 1980s, the prices came crashing, so did the economy. This recession led to multiple protests and riots throughout the country. In the 1990s, the president tried reforming the economy. However, the people were not happy with it because all of a sudden their costs of living went through the roof. Now, this led to 2 military coups and multiple recessions in the 1990s. People were definitely not happy with their economy or their democracy. The same person who had instigated the military coup, that is Hugo Chavez, he ran for president in 1998. His platform mostly relied on getting rid of corruption and diversifying the economy. The things people wanted is exactly what he promised. Using his platform and his charisma, he was able to win 56% of the vote share, which is higher than any president before his times. Now, apart from being a great politician and a charismatic person, he was also very lucky because as soon as he comes into power, the same oil that had led to the doom of the last presidents, it started booming again. All of a sudden, the oil prices shot up. Now with this oil boom, he started doing exactly what the other presidents were doing. He started funding more social welfare programs, poverty started coming down, employment went up. All of the good things were happening. However, it was not all sunshine and rainbows. His tenure was authoritarian and corruption was a major problem still. Even though his policies were well intended and had some success, they were increasingly being run by crony politicians. A very good example that captures both corruption and authoritarianism under his regime is the state-run oil company. This company was once seen as the best-run oil production company in the world. A state company was competing and better in many cases than most of the international multinational companies. When in 2002 these employees went on protest and strike, Chavez didn't listen to them or fix any of the concerns they had. Instead, he decided to fire all 18 to 19,000 of these employees and just get rid of them. This wasn't the best decision either for his country or his own pocket. You see, when you fire that many people, the oil production, the single resource your country depends on, comes to a standstill. And that's exactly what happened. This triggered a recession that was very well avoidable. However, things were going to turn for the worst.
Hundreds gather in the streets of the Venezuelan capital after the announcement of the death of their president Hugo Chavez.
In the March of 2013, Chavez died from cancer, and his hand-picked leader, that is Nicolas Maduro, was made the president. Now, if Chavez is considered a great politician, a charismatic person, and someone who got lucky with the oil prices, Maduro had none of these things in his favor. For starters, he barely won the elections with a very small margin over his opposition. And that's not just it. In 2014, a year or so into his presidency, the oil prices plummeted. Along came the economy. Overnight, the inflation went right through the roof. Within a few years, the inflation rates were as high as 52,000%. There were shortages of all kinds of things. People didn't have food, they didn't have medical stuff they need. The hospitals were using techniques from 1950s, using stuff they had just in their storage. Things were not looking good. And it wasn't just the fact that the oil prices were plummeting. During his reign, the oil production of the country was declining as well. Now, this isn't just his fault. Him, Chavez, and all the previous leaders had over the time not reinvested into the oil production. Again, something they should have done, considering it's the only resource your country depends on. Now, people protested through 2014 to 2017. They protested left, right, and center. And Maduro took a page from Chavez's book and came down with brutal force. Protesters were beaten, killed, whatever it took, but the protests were stopped right before the elections of 2018. Now let's put this whole political discussion to the side for a second. Let's first look at what will it take in order to fix the economy of Venezuela. In a very weird way, in order to fix a petrostate, they need to produce more oil, use that money in order to fix hyperinflation so that people can have a slightly better life, and then use the same oil money that's being produced to diversify the economy and become less dependent on it. All of these things sound easy, but they take time. And in case of Maduro, he's had 10 years in power and he hasn't done any of it. So the likelihood of him fixing the issue is very low. The only solution that seems viable at this point is political change. If a new person becomes the leader of the country, things may just go in the right direction. That's where 2018 elections come into play. Now, right around 2018, the country's already seen 4 to 5 years of recession and super high inflation. Again, percentages no one in the world has ever seen. So the likelihood of Maduro winning is slim or none. However, in 2018, he wins again. Now, the transparency and the freedom of these elections is highly debated. No one really thinks that Maduro could have won those elections if he hadn't cheated. That's exactly what the opposition believed as well. So they decided that they'll declare a new president. The Speaker of the National Assembly was declared the president. 50 countries across the globe, USA, UK, and many major countries endorsed this president and agreed with him. But this recognition had little to no impact back home, because back home, Maduro still had power and had an authoritarian grip over all the different institutions of the government in Venezuela. Now, since 2018, it's been 6 years, and Maduro has finished another term, and this July, Venezuela will be going back to another election. Now, what are the prospects of Venezuelans when it comes to the current elections? Here's the thing, the chances of another leader coming into power are slimmer than ever before. Now, around 2018, Maduro still tried pretending being democratic. These days, he doesn't even care and does just whatever he wants, but does it by the book that he wrote. I'll give you an example. In the October of 2023, Biden administration, which is already suffering from a wave of refugees fleeing into America from Venezuela, is on the table sitting and discussing things with Maduro government. One of the deals they signed together is America will pull back on some of the sanctions and allow Venezuela to sell its oil to more countries, as long as Maduro promises to hold a free and fair election. The ink on the paper hadn't even dried when Maduro went back to business as usual. Basically, he banned the one big strong contender he had from even running in the elections, disqualifying her on some stupid claims. Now, it's not just her. Anyone who has come close to opposing him in a fair election has been disqualified by the Supreme Court, which is full of his judges, or the Election Commission, which is highly influenced by him. Someone or the other will disqualify anyone who is willing to oppose him. Now, Maduro can't just disqualify every single person who can offer him opposition. So his government did allow this one former diplomat who's in his 70s to run for the president. Given the circumstances, all opposition leaders have decided to band together and stand behind Mr. Gonzalez, this diplomat who was unknown to the rest of the country literally a few months back. Now he is the leading rival for Maduro. Mr. Gonzalez has been gaining popularity recently, but he's only had a few months to build his popularity. Now, all this support from all these opposition leaders has been helpful. They are going out there rallying for him. Even if, let's say, the day of elections, Mr. Gonzalez has enough support, what are the chances the elections would be free and fair? What if Maduro just lies on the ballot or has his election commission just fake the results? Now, I'll be the first one to admit it. It is very unlikely that Maduro will step off the power even if he loses, or he'll just fake the results. But in the world of geopolitics and economics, there's always hope. And hope is all they have right now. When the country goes to elections in the coming July, only time will tell if Maduro will be outed and a new president will come in. And we'll have to see what the new president does as well, because time and time again, presidents of Venezuela have let down the people. That's it for this video. I hope you've learned a few things about how Venezuelan crisis happened and where it's going. I'll see you in 2 weeks' time from now. Till then, peace. Bye.